I want to show you a couple of other things you might run into as you're doing some reactions in Beyond Labs. And this is all to mimic things you'll encounter in an actual laboratory. So for example, let's look at this alkyl halide solvolysis. And this we're going to make 2-methyl-2-propanol, which is just tert-butanol. So if we open that up, here's our reagents. And what I'm going to use for that is tert-butyl chloride. And I'll drag that to my reaction flask. This is the solvolysis with water as the solvent, because the water will replace the Cl with an OH. So I want to pick water as my solvent and drag that to the reaction flask. So now we can see both of those items are in the flask. Let's bring it up to the stir plate. And with this one and a lot of substitution reactions, we often do those under cold conditions. So I'm going to add some ice to this. And then as a catalyst, we need acid. So I'm going to use sulfuric acid and add that. Because this is an aqueous reaction, there's really not a need for an inert atmosphere like nitrogen, so I'm not going to use that, but I'll start the reaction. Let's go ahead and take a TLC, and you'll find that nothing shows up. We're not making anything UV active here. Sometimes things don't show up on TLC, and that's okay. If that happens, you just record none as your RF value. But what we can see is on the chalkboard, we see that the new product is forming. And I'm just going to advance the time. And I'll continue to do that until all the starting material is gone, and now we just have product. Now that the reaction's done, we basically want to stop this reaction and work it up. So I'm going to drag the separatory funnel over to the flask. And now all the contents of the reaction are in the separatory funnel. For the reagent to quench this, you could probably choose a couple of different things here, but what I see is that I have acid formed. Since there's acid, I want to neutralize that, so I'm going to use sodium hydroxide and add that. So now I have my two layers. If you drag your organic layer over to the cork ring, and if you hover your mouse over it, there's nothing in it. Your product is still here in the water layer. That means your product isn't soluble in the ether solvent. And if you try to take an NMR, you can't do it because you don't have any product there. So what I want to do is just get rid of this flask because there's nothing in it. And now I have this aqueous layer. What I'm going to do is drag the aqueous layer to my cork ring. And now I have my product in water. And there's a couple of ways to get this product out of the water layer. You might recrystallize it. You might do a distillation. So let's first try and see if we can recrystallize. Here's the crystallizing dish. I'll drag that over here. I crystallized it, and I end up with just hydrochloric acid. So what happened was, in addition to my water going away, my product also evaporated. So that doesn't work. Well, unfortunately, just like in a real lab, my product's gone. So I need to start this all over again. So I'm going to clear the lab, but you know what you're doing now, so you can quickly restart your reaction. I'll get my tert-butyl chloride, put it in the flask, add the water to the flask. Now that we have those, I'll drag this up here and then add the acid again. If you have trouble adding a reagent, another way to do this is just double click on it and that'll add it to the flask. All right, so let's put this on ice, start our reaction, and then I'll progress it. until the starting material is gone. I still need to quench this reaction, so I'll use my separatory funnel, add the base, get rid of this organic layer. Now I'll pull my aqueous layer over here. All right, so now I need to do the distillation. So let's get rid of the separatory funnel. And I'm going to put this flask with my material back on the stir plate, and then I'll grab the distillation apparatus and drag it over here. Now we're set up to do the distillation. When you do a distillation, you need to make sure your distillation is vented, so I need to put the nitrogen gas onto that. That adds a vent. From there, I'll start the distillation. And here's where you're starting, or here's where your stuff is now. It needs to end up in the collection flask. The distillation takes time, so we can advance this. After some time, now my product is over here in the collection flask, and then just water and hydrochloric acids over here in the distillation flask. So drag your collection flask to the cork ring, and then from there, now you can take an NMR, and now we get an NMR of the product. You can also, if you want to switch this to carbon-13, just click here and switch to carbon, and you can also take an NMR. Because it's a liquid, you can't take a melting point. You can again try TLC, but in this case, nothing shows up on the TLC. So now that you're done, you can just collect your data and clear the lab.